these sessions have been kind of organized and put together by OHASSTA-AESHO, and we are a volunteer organization. So I do want to take this opportunity to say that I'm grateful to work with such an amazing group of educators who inspire me and work really hard in order to make these sessions happen. And this organization has been around since 1978. We have a wealth of resources on our webpage, and you can follow us on Twitter. We're always sharing, but we are a community of educators. So everything that we do is by educators, for educators, to support educators. So we love hearing from you, and we have lots of we have a blog post situation. So if you have something that you want to share, we would love to be able to post that. But basically our entire mandate is to support educators in Ontario in history and social sciences. We're using Zoom platform, so we do want to take a moment and express our gratitude to OTF because they're the ones who provide this platform for us. But there's just a few things that if you've never used Zoom before, on the bottom of the bar, there's a mute button, and then there's which hopefully you can stay muted, except in the breakout rooms, just because of the background noise. We'd love to have your video on because we love to see your faces, so feel free to do that. And then the chat feature is what we're going to be using. So even through when the panelists are speaking, if you have a question, please feel free to put it in the chat. We'll be monitoring that. And Raman is our tech person for the evening, so if you have any issues, you can feel free to direct message Raman as well. Yeah, I think that's it. And then the session's being recorded, which I already talked about. So as Jan mentioned, this is the first of 4 sessions. So you've received all of the information. We have amazing panelists that are going to carry us through. We're also going to hope that you're going to provide feedback to us so that we can continue to grow and, you know, meet the needs of you as educators in Ontario. And as I already mentioned, we'll make sure that we'll be compiling resources, and we will share out these resources a few days after each session, just in case you miss it. So we're going to start with norms. So norms are an important place to start, especially when it comes to challenging conversations. Because, well, for several reasons, these can be co-created with your students or participants, or you can also use norms such as this that have already been created, or Glenn Singleton's Courageous Conversation norms. But the reason why they are important is because they create a common guideline for everybody who's engaging in conversation. It sets the framework for the importance of diverse perspectives. And I think that's what we really should be focusing on. So it shifts the conversation away from the debate to the deeper understanding, which is what we are hoping our students will gather. And then privileging that idea of diverse perspectives, and that we need to be learning from each other and listening to each other. And it also creates a space where everybody who's engaging in the conversation knows the expectations, which leads to this idea of what a safe space should look like or feel like, because we're all being held to the same expectations. And then knowing, of course, that, you know, that those expectations will be managed, which also provides the safety for students to engage in conversation. So you can just see by the norms that are on your screen, you know, committing to action, you know, be willing to grapple with challenging ideas, that idea of like experiencing discomfort, you know, walking away without an answer. All of these things are very difficult for students to deal with that uncertainty, but the uncertainty, I think, is the important emotion or feeling that they need to get comfortable with, because this is how they're going to learn and grow, just like how we learn and grow in that area of uncertainty. Okay, so just to get us thinking about why we're here tonight, we're going to try this connection before content. So kind of a minds on, really. So we'll use this one strategy. So the strategy is called 3-2-1 Waterfall. It's a great strategy when you're learning online, but I'll show you something you can use in the classroom. So for us, how it works is I'm going to pose a question to you. I'm going to give you, 30 seconds to answer the question. Type it in the chat, but don't hit send. And then when I say, 3-2-1 Waterfall, then everyone will hit the send button, and our responses will look like a waterfall. If that makes any sense, it's going to be great. So the question I'm asking to you is, what is the most challenging topic you have encountered in the classroom? So what are those challenging conversations that are appearing in your classroom and, posing a challenge for you and how to respond or engage or any of those things. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds. So if you want to type it in the chat and then don't hit send yet. Okay, ready? So 3, 2, 1, waterfall. Gender, privilege, modern conflict. So you can see we have a lot of common conversations. Amazing. Thank you. This will be great. Okay, good. Thank you. So this will just give you a sense if you use a strategy to kind of see what students are thinking, what questions they have. And it also kind of, you get to see that moment snapshot. So they haven't listened to anybody before. It's how they're feeling or thinking in that moment. And it also gives time for reflection. So that 30 seconds is an opportunity for them to think before they see, and then just the enter button at that same time. If you're in a classroom, I'm sure other people use this strategy, but Mentimeter, which is free, is a great way also to engage. So you don't have to show your screen to students. So they're populating things without seeing other responses. And then a word cloud is what this is called. So the more times it is typed in, the larger the word gets. So you can see more prevalent or popular that response is. To give you a sense, this is nice beforehand as a content for connection, or it's also nice in the end as a consolidation piece, just so you can see what students are still thinking, still grappling with when it comes to complexities of conversations. Yes. Well, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Butch, who will introduce our panelists.
All right. Thank you, Sarah, for a nice start off to this. Welcome, everyone, to our evening here. We've got a lot of experts that are excited to talk to you about the challenges that we're having in our conversation in our classrooms, as they also have it as professors in their careers as well. I'll introduce them to get us going here. And our first is going to be Dr. Sandra Lapointe. And Sandra is a professor of philosophy at McMaster University, and she's a Commonwealth alumna, a fellow of the Humboldt Foundation, and an award-winning scholar. Her current research agenda revolves around bringing a social sciences and humanities perspective on issues connected to policy, knowledge, mobilization, and skills development for social innovation and impact. Sounds quite busy. We'll let her take the first question that we're looking at here for discussion, and that is, what are the key considerations in framing an unbiased discussion question?
That's a question I love so much. I'm a philosopher by training, and questions that have to do with bias are really at the root of what we're doing when we're teaching critical thinking. So we want to get the students to think in ways that are not going to be biased and recognize, all these topics that we're going to be talking about today. And when I was thinking about the answer I wanted to give to this question, I was actually thinking about the graduate seminar that I'm teaching. And it's a seminar on epistemology, and we're reading this amazing book that's called The Enigma of Reason, which is a book about, rationality, what it is, how we come to be rational, et cetera, and the nature of human rationality. And one of the things that we learn in this book is that, rationality, just like any other aspect of who we are as humans, is the product of evolution, right? And I'm not going to give you the whole story, but the end of the line is that we've evolved to be rational in specific ways. And when we're thinking about rationality, of course, being rational, we want to be as rational as possible, as opposed to be biased. And what we know about rationality is that it's very lazy, and it has all the features of something that actually, when we think about the way in which we produce reasons, because when we formulate questions, I'm going to come to questions afterwards, because I think we need to know how we think first, right? When it comes to us formulating argument or providing justification for what we do, we're intrinsically biased and we're intrinsically lazy. So people mostly produce reasons for their side. So we're very self-centered. And when it comes to the expectations we have about the reasons that we give ourselves, we're very lazy. So we're not going to be very demanding when it comes to the reasons that we are providing to justify our behavior. On the other hand, when we're evaluating the reasons that others give us, so somebody makes a statement, provides an argument, we have a tendency to be really unbiased. And what's really interesting is that people are going to actually accept the most challenging reasons if they are strong enough. So there's something about us evaluating other people's argument as opposed to putting forward our own argument. And at the same time, we're way more demanding towards others than we are to ourselves. So when we package all that together, the answer to the question, I think, is, well, the best way to not be biased in formulating a question is to do it not on our own, but to do it as part of a dialectical exercise, as part of a conversation, as part of a dialogue. And I think that, I mean, and this is maybe just giving an example, but the kind of work that we get students to do in groups as part of inquiry, which is, you know, very collaborative and very dialogical, is part of an effort to come to a point where we're ever more unbiased, because we are very good at evaluating each other's responses. And in a collaborative setting, in a group setting where the students are encouraged to do that respectfully, that is, I think, probably the best way to proceed. So coming to questions is not just about thinking about questions. I think it should be part of an exercise that is itself very dialogical.
Awesome. I think we all want that bumper sticker on our car, intrinsically biased and lazy. I think I'd love to put that on my my vehicle as I'm going down the road. Our second presenter tonight is Carla Peck, and Carla Peck is a professor of social studies education in the Department of Elementary Education at the University of Alberta, and director of Thinking Historically for Canada's Future, an SSHRC funded partnership grant. She researches, teaches students understandings of democratic concepts, teachers and students, historical understandings, and is particularly interested in the relationship between students, ethnic identities, and their understanding of history. Before Carla found her way to academia, she was an elementary teacher in New Brunswick. So welcome, Carla. It'll be the same question for you, but I'll repeat it just so we're clear. What are the key considerations in framing an unbiased discussion question?
Great. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. And I think the same, I'm going to say something that I think the same is true for Sandra and perhaps Joel as well, is that si vous avez des questions en français plus tard, je peux répondre en français ou je peux essayer à répondre en français. So if there are questions in French, we can also address those when it comes maybe to the breakout sessions. So social studies, especially social studies, is a really strong social studies curriculum is meant to be issues focused, and the pursuit of powerful questions is a really great way to engage students and to help them see, I think, the relevance of whatever they're learning in social studies to their lives and to contemporary society today. And so my first piece of advice would be to think about questions that are grounded in real world events that perhaps are happening right in the students' backyards, or could be further afield. Sometimes it's okay to do something that's a little further away because it allows a little bit of distance between the student and the question. But sometimes those more immediate sort of questions right in the student's environment can also draw them in. In other words, try to find questions that they're going to resonate with students and that are really authentic, that are not sort of straw person kind of questions, that are proposing a solution for a problem that doesn't exist. That you want to, I think, really think about questions that are authentic, that have real world application, and that maybe are really sort of facing our society today. And coupled with that, I would say that as the teacher, I don't need to be the one to come up with the question necessarily. That students have lots of questions. And so how could we, as sort of Sandra has pointed to, how can we support students to think about the kinds of questions they want to investigate and then help them shape them in such a way so that it allows the exploration of ideas and also the exploration of, I think we all come to every single thing that we study through questions or research or whatever with perspectives. And we're not blank slates, we're not unfeeling people. And so helping students sort of recognize that they maybe have a certain investment in the way a question is phrased might also help them unpack how a question ultimately gets asked, or that they're using that question to investigate and pursue their research. The other thing that I would say is, in Alberta recently, we had a very sketchy push poll related to abortion, where it said, kids can't even get an Advil while they're in school, but they can get an abortion at such and such an age. And so the question was automatically guiding people to a particular kind of answer. And so you want to really shape the questions so that they aren't, guiding to one answer in particular.
Excellent. Really powerful when you start to think about adding in the student voice and creating those questions. So I think that's a great suggestion, Carla. So thank you for that. Our third presenter is Joel Westheimer. He's a professor of education at the University of Ottawa, former university research chair in democracy and education, and a columnist for CBC's radio's morning show. He received a PhD from Stanford and his BSc from Princeton. He's a co-founder and executive director of Democratic Dialogue. He's an award-winning author and a recipient of the Canadian Education Association's Whitworth Award and Knight Fellow for Civic Education and Higher Education. So once again, thank you for our final panelist, Joel. Same question to you. What are the key considerations in framing an unbiased discussion question? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction. I'm going to just try and zero in on a couple of things that weren't said yet, since I have the benefit of going last. And the first is that I'll talk about these as sort of common misperceptions. And one misperception of a controversial issue is that all issues for which anyone disagrees are controversial issues, because there are things that are not controversial. If there's 3 students in your class who want to put forward the idea that germ theory doesn't exist and that we don't, those are settled issues that are not controversial. You could have them, if you want to entertain that, have them, work with argument and evidence to show that, but they're not the best unbiased issues to put forward, because there's clear evidence for one way or the other. It's different than an issue, for example, whether we should lower the voting age. That's a controversial issue, right? There are legitimate controversies around those issues. Now, there are blurry lines between some of those, but it's just important to know that not all issues are legitimate controversial issues. And secondly, presenting in a non-biased way, since I'm trying to address that question directly, does not mean, another misperception is that you do it 50-50, so that you give equal time to this side and then the equal time to this side. Or if you have a panel, you're going to have 2 speakers on this side and 2 speakers on that side. That can be the case for some issues, but is not necessarily the case because it fails to take into account 2 very important characteristics of what goes into the pedagogy of teaching in an unbiased way. The first is who your audience is. If everyone in your class already is super convinced about one side of this issue, then pedagogically as a teacher, what you need to do is open up a space for the consideration of the other side. If you don't think that's worth it, then it's not a worthy controversial issue to bring with your class. The second thing is to consider is not just the audience, but the mainstream positions on these issues. Because if there's a hegemonic agreement on one side of the issue, then your job as a teacher is, again, to open up space for that other position. So, for example, if you're going to debate which is the better economic system, capitalism or socialism, it's not like you give equal time 50-50, because we're all steeped in this country in capitalist positions. And so you'd want to figure out how you can have people consider the pros and cons of capitalism or socialism. That's just one example. So those are two things I think that are sort of misperceptions about the way you handle controversial issues to make them unbiased.
Excellent. Clear and concise and right in the timeline. So great. We'll have all three presenters now spotlighted, and I'll ask you the question. I'll let you guys decide who's going to go first, but so who's more aggressive on getting into the answer right away. But the second question that we're looking at is, how do you suggest teachers effectively deal with polarizing views, misinformation, and disinformation in the learning environment? Because there seems to be plenty of all of those factors in our current climate in the classrooms and the media. So,
well, since I went last, maybe I'll go first this time. How's that?
Perfect.
I want to say one very important thing about this is that you don't just parachute in and teach a controversial issue. It starts with building community and trust in the classroom. And so all the activities that you do at the beginning of the year have to do with establishing a climate where students can already talk to one another. Just consider, in other words, teaching a controversial issue doesn't start just when you're teaching the controversial issue. It starts by building strong communities and trust with two groups, one among the students and between the students and yourself, and also building trust with parents. Because so that when blowback happens, and if it does happen, you have a base of trust to work with, at least to start off. So that's what I'll say on that.
Excellent.
Yeah, I can build on that. I 100% agree that that it's important to the community that you build from day one in your classroom will either support or hinder what's possible when it comes to engaging with difficult conversations. And I think that the communication has got to be key to help students understand, where are the boundaries for what's possible, for respectful dialogue. And one of the things that I often, talk with my pre-service teachers about is that for a lot of people, sort of group discussion, group work, larger classroom conversations, it doesn't necessarily come naturally to people. That there are actual skills we need to develop in helping students, supporting students to be able to engage in these conversations. So the environment, the community is absolutely crucial, but we can also help students develop skills like detecting fact from opinion and focusing on the argument, not the person, these kinds of things that I'm sure everybody's familiar with. The other thing that I would say is that I've become more interested in lately is the idea of pre-bunking. And I don't know if people know about this term, but pre-bunking, it's kind of like when you give yourself a vaccine that helps ward off a disease. Pre-bunking is about teaching skills, how arguments and ideas can get manipulated and twisted, and the strategies that are used in the media and elsewhere, so that when students are now starting to engage in their own conversations, they can recognize in sources that they're using to sort of support their arguments when manipulation might be happening. And so that's again another example of a skill that would help students engage in discussions of difficult topics in a way that they're aware of ideas do get manipulated, and for a purpose, not just by mistake. And so that's an important awareness for students.
No, I completely agree. There's something about polarizing views and misinformation and disinformation that it really creates this sort of very emotionally charged position, right? Someone who takes on a polarizing view does that with a lot of emotion. So it's hard to discuss these things. So one of the very important things to do, and I'm sure everyone is doing that, is to create a classroom environment that feels psychologically safe, right? And it's hard to do that when, in a way that is not going to feel like you're enabling people who are having maybe problematic views. So I used to teach philosophy in Kansas. And in Kansas, their views were very polarized. Every big moral debate that has been solved here in Canada, basically, or is not as polarized, was there. And one way I was able to create a classroom that felt psychologically safe, where everyone felt they could voice their views, was by really moving away from those, are asking the students to move away from their positions and really look at the reasons they had to support these positions. Because a view in itself is not interesting. What's interesting is the reasons you have to hold these views. But the thing that's great about students looking at the reasons they have to support a claim is that we usually are pretty good at recognizing good reasons and bad reasons, but as reasons, that is, as supporting a certain conclusion. And so one way that I was able to really sort of reduce the electric charge in the classroom when we were talking about prostitution and abortion and gender, and I was teaching the philosophy of love and sex in Kansas, I was a little bit ambitious, was to ask the students to really distinguish between reasons that are not supported because you just have to believe, things that have to do with faith, like religious faith, and opinions that you have that are supported by reasons and objective reasons and good reasons, which is really what knowledge is. And I was asking them to move away from faith, saying, look, faith is fantastic. You can have faith as much as you want. But when it comes to thinking rationally, what we want to do is focus on reasons and knowledge. And that was one way of maybe moving away from polarization, but it doesn't solve the other problems.
Yeah, I think you're all three of you are making some excellent points there. So thank you for that. And I want to also remind you that if you want to answer in French, you can do that too, just for our French guests, if you wish. The follow-up question to kind of link of what you were all speaking to was creating community and trust is really important in the classroom. I don't think you're going to find any teacher that disagrees with that. The problem that was asked in the chat, which I think is a relevant one here, is when you start to get parents that are polarizing themselves. Any tips on how we build that culture or build that bridge? I'll let Sandra, you go first if you wouldn't mind.
Well, I mean, I think I would just go back to what I was saying, maybe walk them through the process of creating a classroom environment where what matters are the arguments and the reasons and not just the beliefs of people, because people can have very good beliefs, but if they don't have good reasons for their beliefs, that's a skill that they're lacking. And your work as an educator is really to help students build strong arguments that are going to support their positions, whatever they are. So whatever the conclusion of their argument, what matters is that they have good reasons to support it. And what the conclusion is not in itself problematic. So if you come up with this, I think it's very hard for a parent to say, oh, no, you're doing the wrong thing, right? You want your kid to be able to argue in a way that's going to be compelling. So maybe that's what I would do, maybe to sort of walk them through the didactic process and the reasons why you're focusing not so much on the opinions themselves, but on the arguments, and that you're not looking to pick and choose which opinions are going to be in the classroom, but just which arguments are going to be in the classroom. Namely, the ones that support the conclusions.
Okay, and Carla?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I would also say, and again, I'm sure this is something that everybody on this Zoom is already doing, but just the importance of clear communication with the family and helping family members know, parents or guardians, that first of all, some of these topics are coming up, in the weeks or months ahead. But also how your approach to tackling these topics in schools, and very much aligned with what Sandra has said, and what Joel has said in the chat. It's not about teaching kids what to think, but we're trying to support them in developing how to think, their thinking strategies, and also their argumentation strategies, and the reliability of the evidence that they draw upon. And that I say to all of my students, not all opinions are created equal, that some opinions can be much more grounded in reliable evidence and well argued versus opinions that are just done off the top of the head. And so I think that also goes back to the community that you're developing in the class, and sort of what are the norms, what are the expectations for when we're engaging in these topics. One of the expectations might be we're going to use reliable sources to inform ourselves before we share an opinion. We're going to be exposed to, oftentimes there aren't two sides to any issue. Sometimes there are 15 sides. And so what is the sort of multiple perspectives on an issue, and helping students be exposed to that, making parents and guardians clear that we're not trying to tell people what to think, but how to think.
For sure. Joel will give you a shot at it too.
Yeah, I feel very strongly about this. I mean, parents, I put something in the chat as well, but parents need to know that one of the roles of schools in democratic societies is to teach kids to deal with multiple perspectives. Parents have a right to raise their kids in the way they want to at home and convey their opinions and their values. They do not have the right to isolate their kids from competing perspectives and competing values, because that's the engine of progress in a democratic society. And teachers need to make that clear to parents, and most importantly, principals need to have teachers back on this. If push comes to shove, teachers need to say, principals need to tell parents that it is part of the teacher's obligation to teach multiple perspectives, and that is a central role of schools in a democratic society. And as Carla just said, nobody's teaching, no one's telling the kids what to think, but we do need to teach them how to think.
Yeah, great answer, and a great perspective to remember. And that's probably got a lot of people worried, is the idea of the principal support and the administrative support. I mean, we want to make sure that there's a culture there where we feel protected as teachers and having those conversations in the classroom. And I do think when you see social science teachers like that we have on this call, they're going to get into these issues a little bit more frequently than maybe other disciplines, right? So we're going to move on to the third discussion question here. And we'll say that as how do we discern who can speak with authority on a topic as an expert? I'm gonna ask Carla or Sandra if you want to, or I think Carla has to go first. She hasn't gone first yet. And maybe we can put one in there en français for our French attendees, please.
So this is potentially a really tricky question, because you want to honor lived experience, and sometimes the lived experiences can be extremely compelling. But how do we balance that? Exactly the question. How do we balance that with academic expertise? And I think, what Joel raised earlier about, it's not just about having two people present this point of view and two people present this point of view, but it's about really thinking through what is the information that students need to be able to develop their understanding of the issue at hand, and also to help them figure out where do they stand on the issue. And I would actually put some of the responsibility on the students to think about, well, where am I going to get this information? Who can we consider an authority on a topic? And how do we know that somebody is an authority on a topic? I think that's all good learning for students to engage in, so that when they are outside of the classroom, they're no longer in school, it's the end of the day, or it's the summertime, or they're into adult life, that they actually have some skills to understand where are some of the most reliable places to source information. And sometimes there will be, you know, a real call for sort of direct experience, being able to speak on a topic. But sometimes the very first question was, how do we avoid bias? Sometimes if we, you know, there's a potential that, you know, a person coming in might only share a very specific way of thinking about a topic. And so then as the teacher, you've got to figure out, okay, how am I going to expose kids to other ideas related to the topic? And always carefully vetting who your guest speakers are, and, you know, sort of talking about, you know, who, what are they going to talk about? What perspective are they going to bring? That kind of thing. So this might be maybe the trickier of the questions, I think, tonight, because you don't want to deny the importance of lived experience, but, you know, how do you bring that in without, you know, overly swaying a conversation or a perspective one way or the other?
I can piggyback right on that, because yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And Rachel and Jan and other members of OHASSTA will know that we have been dealing with that very problem when we were building our first platform, the collaborative inquiry platform, where the entire concept is to broker expertise to teachers. So who are the experts? And it's clear that there's a lot of lived experience that needs to be recognized as a form of expertise. And even in the project that we lead around social innovation, co-design needs to include people who have this lived experience. But the one thing that I would say is that even within academia, there are different kinds of expertise that you might want to draw on. Because, you know, you might think, okay, I'm teaching this course in, what was our example, Jan, in global economics. Who is the expert that I need? And there are different kinds of expertise that you can draw on. So you can have, I mean, for applied problems, you might need technical expertise. You might need to get someone in there who knows how to build the thing or some sort of details. There's, of course, the traditional academic expertise, which is the subject specific area specialization expertise that can be very, very, pointy and not always super relevant. But then there's also broad disciplinary expertise. Maybe what you need in terms of engaging your student is someone who has broad competence in the field, because the questions from your students are going to come from all over the place. So their specialization is not going to be what you need. But there's also a type of expertise, especially in the context of thinking about challenging conversation and the kind of deliberations that go around that. That's not so much about any specific area expertise, but more about the broad know-how of people who are used to framing research questions and translating and the kinds of the kind of expertise that consists in translating what a good research method would be. And that can be very subject neutral. I mean, I would say every researcher in the social science and humanities will have a good chunk of that. So in a process of inquiry, that can come in handy. And Jan will remember when we went to her class to bring experts for her global it was global economics, right, Jan? Yeah. There were 3 experts with 3 very, very different kinds of expertise who came in. One was an ethicist, one was a social philosopher, and one was a sociologist. And the students benefited from their expertise equally, I would say. I don't think there was any difference. So it depends what you want to do, but often the kind of expertise that you need is one that is really rooted in the methods more than in the content, which is more readily available in the days of the internet.
Very true. That's a way that they can actually control and guide the conversation to make sure that it remains respectful, right? So having that classroom control as you go through it. Joel?
Yeah, I mean, experience is experience and expertise is expertise. And pedagogically, we need to make room in our classrooms for experience. That could mean asking students if they have experiences with relatives, or, this would, I don't think you should have them talk about themselves, but with, let's say, abortion, or something that draws on their own personal experiences, and that's experience. That doesn't mean that there's not expertise in the subject. It doesn't mean that a student can then put forward the idea that not having sex education will delay the onset of sexual activity, because experts agree that that's not the case. As the late senator from New York State, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, said, everyone's entitled to their own opinions, but not their own facts. So when we talk about needing to make room for students' experiences, I think that's true. But that's not the same as expertise. We need to ask them about their experiences, find ways to ask them about their experiences and bring those experiences into the discussion. Their experience doesn't mean that they have a counter argument necessarily to established fact through argument and evidence. I'll also just say, but one last thing, just pedagogically, there are so many wonderful ways to do these things that we've all been talking about. Megan mentioned the U-shaped discussion. I don't know if people are familiar with the long table, which is just an absolutely wonderful pedagogy that I use in some of my classes, where a group of students will sit at a table and discuss a topic. And when and then the rest of the students will be around the outside, like a fishbowl kind of thing. But when a student from the outside has something that they want to contribute to the conversation, they tap someone at the table, and that person leaves the table and the next student comes in, and you can have a sort of free-flowing discussion that way, where it's not dominated by one or two students trying to get across. There's walking debates where you move around the classroom depending on your position, things like that. So there's lovely pedagogies that sort of get at a lot of what we've been talking about organically.
Very, very interesting idea. That's the idea of just keeping people moving around too, and it allows them to kind of shift in their answers and their responses as they're going through it.
Well, if I can just very
Go ahead.
quickly mention, I think this is critical, that students learn that it's okay to change their mind, that it's, in fact, it's valued that they change their mind as they learn more and figure out where do they stand on an issue, or how do they understand an issue as it becomes more complex, more nuanced. Because we live in a society where people have just become so entrenched, and it's almost viewed as a weakness that you might change your position on an issue, when in fact what we need, I think, in a democratic society is people who evolve in their thinking and are willing to say, you know what, I had that wrong, I see it differently now. And if we don't get there, then we're just going to stay fighting with each other on X or Twitter or whatever it's called, and not actually having nuanced conversations that move our society forward. So I think this idea that it's okay, whether it's the long table or the U-shape or the walking discussion or whatever, as Joel said, those beautiful pedagogies that you can use, but that it's okay and in fact valuable to recognize shifts in thinking. It's not a weakness.
Yeah, for sure. And bringing that into your debriefing at the end of it, right? Like even just if they don't want to share that to everybody else at the beginning, you can kind of create that culture by saying, let's write down our reflection of where we started and where we're at now.
Exactly.
And start to acknowledge that those are things that are going to be able to be shifted as they go through. I think that's a really important point, Carla. I agree with you 100%. Our next question is, how have your work experiences altered your practices over your career when engaging in critical or challenging conversations? So this is where you guys get to demonstrate that you've shifted and grown from the beginning of your career till now, just as you were saying it's important for students to do. So we'll start probably with you, Joel. I think you haven't started for a bit.
Um, I've I think I was more didactic when I started teaching, not in pedagogy, but in wanting to get particular opinions across. And I think that we suffer especially in teacher education, from a sort of orthodoxy on some issues that is not effective at changing anyone's mind. It just sort of further entrenches people. And so I have relied much more now when I teach on assigning readings that represent multiple perspectives, rather than sort of hiding behind readings that I agree with. And I trust the classroom dialogue to sort of tease out the points that I want to get across. And I find that it's more effective to do that when you actually have readings and discussion that represent multiple perspectives, rather than trying to enforce a certain orthodoxy that you might hold to a position, because you just end up having the students who have those positions to begin with to be further entrenched in those positions, and the students who don't to basically resent the one-sided presentation and to further entrench themselves in their position. So I've become much more willing to teach the controversies.
Great point. The idea that a student might be more focused on being right rather than learning, right? There's a big difference between those two.
Yeah.
Sandra?
So I think what I've learned I mean, engaging in challenging conversation is what I'm paid to do, or producing arguments. So we're always sort of trying to evaluate, things that are hard to figure out. And I think what's changed for me is the idea that you can do that on your own. So it's one thing, of course, I can do research, but really to engage in a challenging conversation, or to reflect and deepen my understanding of a problematic topic, not a problematic topic, but un problème difficile, un problème complexe. Et peut-être que je vais continuer à répondre en français parce que il n'y a pas eu beaucoup de français. Ce que j'ai appris, c'est qu'en fait, ça se fait beaucoup à travers les efforts collaboratifs. Donc, et puis, avoir confiance dans le processus collaboratif autour d'une discussion, avoir confiance dans le fait que ensemble, dans un contexte où évidemment la collaboration est possible parce qu'on a bien coaché nos étudiants, euh, avoir confiance dans le fait qu'ensemble, on va trouver la solution. C'est en fait donner beaucoup de pouvoir puis d'autonomie à nos étudiants. C'est les laisser eux-mêmes trouver leur solution. So I think the engaging in order to really do justice to the complexity of challenging topics, we can't do it on our own, and our students can't do it on their own. And the collaborative, deliberative process that should be involved in any good research. That process that makes sure that we bring all the perspectives and that we can be critical, but in a positive way. I think that's what I've discovered and learned to trust. I come from a discipline that has always been very individualistic. And I think that as a whole in academia, and I'm sure, Carla, given the work that you do, and Joel, you'll agree, we have to start moving more and more into these contexts where we work together on these issues. And we don't think that as experts or scientists, we're able to come up with the solution on our own. We won't be. The problems are too complex. It's impossible. If you think you can address a problem, it's because you've tailored the problem so you could address it, and it's not a real problem. So that's what I've learned.
Yes,
All right.
somebody south of the border once said, "I alone can fix it." Right? This is we want to avoid, this way of thinking. So for me, I've been thinking about this question a lot, and I very much agree with what Joel and Sandra have already said. So perhaps I'll add this. whether it's by choice or not, the context in Alberta over the last 5 to 7 years has required public engagement with controversial issues. And I have found my voice in the public sphere by contributing to media, by accepting invitations to parent town halls who want to know more about, in my case, social studies curriculum and what all the problems have been and why it's problematic for the future of the province. And that has been a space that I didn't necessarily shy away from, but I just didn't know how to engage in that space previously. But the topics and the issues were such in Alberta that I just could not stay quiet any longer. And I thought, I'm in a position of privilege. I'm a tenured professor. I have academic freedom. And so, I have, a certain amount, I see it as a responsibility to try and contribute to public discussion with these on, certain topics that fall within my area of expertise. And to connect that to the K-12 classroom, I would say that we all sort of hold that responsibility to try and figure out how do we have responsible, well-informed discussions about issues facing our society today that, as Sandra has said, are way too complex for one person to try and address, that often, require diverse ways of thinking, diverse perspectives that might shake you up completely because it's not a way that you've been thinking about a topic before. But it's by sort of exposure to these kinds of conversations and practice with these kinds of conversations that our society has hope, I think. That's what gives me hope that students in our schools who are not citizens in waiting, they are citizens now, they've got ideas, they've got a voice. And how can we help them find their voice in a safe place in the classroom, but also that in a way that helps them strengthen their own developing thinking about an issue and helps them figure out ways to communicate what it is that they believe in.
Yeah, you're right on there. And I think when you're all kind of hinting at the idea of our politicians right now and how we get further and further entrenched in positions away from the center and how that's impacting us in the classroom. That's going to be one of our topics in the future weeks that we're going to be looking specifically at politics. So certainly you're on theme with what we're looking at the Institute. So thank you for that. In doing this, our last area, I guess, our time slot here is just to add anything that you think you may have missed into this discussion or something that you may look at as a perspective that you might offer as advice for teachers who are in the classrooms at this time. So a little more open-ended. You can add in anything that you like right here, but the idea that we're looking to experiences that you guys are probably going through at the university level as well with a lot more focused group. And we're doing this with high school students or younger. So I'll open the floor to that.
Okay, I'll start and then we'll let the other two finish because I've already talked a lot. But je vais répondre en français. Je veux dire que vous n'êtes pas seul. Vous n'êtes pas toute seule des enseignantes dans les salles de classe. Vous avez des collègues ici sur Zoom, mais aussi dans vos écoles, dans vos conseils scolaires. Et vous ne devez pas travailler toute seule à découvrir comment faire des discussions difficiles avec les élèves. Vous avez un système d'appui autour de vous et aussi un système qui inclut nous trois ici sur l'écran, qui peut vous appuyer quand vous voulez faire des discussions avec vos élèves. Alors, vous ne devez pas vous inquiéter que je suis toute seule, je ne sais pas quoi le faire. Nous sommes ici, vos collègues sont là pour vous aider.
Et je vais tout de suite rajouter, so I'm going to say this in English, but exactly what Carla said, but it's not just the three of us, and it's dozens and dozens and dozens of academic experts who are willing to come to your classroom to support you through the collaborative inquiry. It's still free. I hope it's going to stay free forever. So if you are engaging in these topics, sometimes it's good to have someone to bring a perspective that is that of an expert, whether it's a broad disciplinary expert or a specialist. But this is actually, and I'm sure you'll have opportunities to take a look at it, but sign up and make a request or just sign up and we'll contact you to walk you through the process because you are not alone. I'm sorry, I did a plug. I hope that's okay.
Absolutely. Joel?
I agree with all of that. I guess I'll just add one thing, that there are some, when thinking about classroom topics and controversial issues, there are some topics that are no-go issues. And I think one criteria for a no-go issue is a position that basically says that a student in the class or some students in the class don't have a right to exist, or that challenges their essential dignity. And those are no-go topics. There's not controversy about them. They're no-go topics, and the teacher has a responsibility to protect those students. And then I'll just reiterate the importance, of course, of I'm so glad that we're having this discussion and that this group is, hosting discussions like this, because I'll reiterate that in a democratic society, it is critical that we have pedagogies that help students deal with multiple perspectives and help them talk across differences in productive ways. And that's we're offering an example of doing that right here. Although the three of us probably agree with each other on most things, but I still think this is a constructive dialogue, and we need more of that in schools.
Exactly. I really like the way you framed it too, like the concept here of allowing or having these difficult conversations and using the pedagogy to allow people to contribute to that conversation rather than being dominated by a few strong opinions in the classroom. That's going to be a pivotal part of making sure that everybody feels heard in that room, but also of controlling some of that heat of the conversation and the temperature of what's going on in the room. So definitely an important point for us to consider. That's going to conclude the kind of the discussion part of this evening. So you guys did fantastic. That's such a strong start for us. So I really, really appreciate you guys sharing your opinions on that. And of course, invite you to join us in some of the breakout rooms if you have time. I know you guys have busy schedules and so on, but that'll be more of a 1 to 10 ratio. You will get to actually hear some of the people who are attending and see some of their opinions as well.
I do want to share a Padlet with everybody. Just put it in the chat that had the resources or the strategies we looked at today. But if you have come across or you use anything in your classroom, feel free to add it to the Padlet, and we'll continue to share out these resources.
And we could probably add this into our next session too, just to continue to add or let it grow as we move through this, in case people feel jammed for time right now.
Yeah, totally. And I'll share it out in the email as well, following up from this session. So, and Roman is also going to put in a link to a survey. It's just a short survey. It's just going to help us move forward and plan so we can meet your expectations. And we have 3 more sessions. This was an amazing start. But it will just give us some information just to make sure that if there's anything you want to see, we can still work that in. We have some more amazing panelists. Then also it'll give us a sense of how to use the breakout time space if there are certain topics you want to explore. Or
I'll add in that we had some generous sponsorships here for the evening, and that included AEFO, SENC at our national body for social science teachers. We had some support from Windsor-Essex County Catholic District School Board and some from OSSTF District 9 in the Windsor-Essex County area, as well as Elections Canada. So I thank all of our sponsors for that information as well and that support.
Yes, and our next session is March 5th at the same time, 7 to 8:30, and it will be on challenging conversations about history. So a little bit more subject specific, but still general amazing strategies. And we have a great series or more great panelists, and we'll share that out in an email to follow. So I want to thank everybody for your gift of time. I know everybody is tired and everybody's busy because you're all amazing educators and working with amazing people. So I just want to say I appreciate you giving up an evening to spend with us.
Merci, merci à tout le monde, merci aux panélistes. À la prochaine fois.
Yep. Thank you so much to our panelists for coming, that's for sure. They definitely started it off with a strong start, so much appreciated.
Thanks for having us. Take care, everyone.
Thanks very much.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.